Our world has become violent. With the robots taking our jobs, the military commanding our lives. We must bring unity back to our beloved Mother Russia. My son, if you are reading this, I am gone. My decisions have left you alone, and for that, I'm sorry. Please, do what you must to make this world better. Do what you can to bring our people together. Help Mother Russia rise like the phoenix from the old tales. Bring her back from the ashes of the war, and bring us peace during this colder war.
Colder War is an adventure game where a young boy must navigate through a world full of chaos and consequences. Colder War will make use of a 2.5D perspective to create platformer-style environments and puzzles. This perspective also allows the developers to portray what this world is like by using unique background and foreground elements. By using these techniques, we can immerse the player and make them truly feel like an observer in this world.
Colder War takes place in the year 2075. Russia is rebuilding after another world war, and while the people of Russia were out fighting in this war, business owners had to figure out ways to keep their businesses from going under, since their workforce had been drafted to fight. Robotics became extremely dominant in Russia, and industry leaders realized that a robot never tires, never quits, and never needs a break. Once the men came back from fighting in the war, there were no jobs for them to take back, as the rich men of Russia had found a way to keep their businesses operating 24 hours a day with robotic employees. Not only did the world become much more advanced in robotics, they also created a cure, the cure. This medical marvel has the ability to cure all of humanity's ailments, but at what cost?
With no jobs and no way for people to continue living as they had before the war, many fell into poverty. The rich see no point in hiring people for jobs that robots can perform just as well. An extremely definitive line has been drawn between the rich and poor in Russia. The poor feel robbed and angry for the rich's abandonment of them, and the rich feel entitled to what they have. They worked hard for it.
With such a divide among the Russian people, two extremist factions have risen within the economic class. The rebellious Kalash are a bloodthirsty and violent group willing to kill rich men and take what they feel they are owed. The Pravda are the wealthiest and most elite members of society in Russia. They feel as though everything they have, they deserve. They feel as though the poor have no right to take from them what they have worked so hard to obtain. Both extremist groups wish to obtain the cure in order to weaponize it and destroy the opposing economic class. The player will take on the role of a small boy who has come across the cure. His grandfather, which will act as the player's call to action, informs him of its importance, thus setting the boy off on his journey.
With the player controlling the actions of only a small boy, navigating the environment will be a key mechanic in Colder War. The game will feature a 2.5D perspective where the player's movements will be restricted to moving left and right across the screen. While the environments will appear as though they are three-dimensional, the core gameplay will take place within 2 dimensions, thus the term 2.5D. With puzzles and a platformer style of gameplay, the player will be forced to jump, duck, hide, and climb in order to traverse the treacherous landscapes of this post-war Russia. The player will also feel the burden of the cure, because as they actively carry it, their navigation speed will be reduced. Using the 2.5D perspective allows the game developers to place rooms or areas in the game world that the player can access, allowing them to enter a sub-level where they will be able to save their progress or interact with various NPCs.
NPCs will be abundant throughout Colder War, whether they are friendly or enemy characters. Friendly NPCs will serve as the primary story element of the game. By interacting with them, the player can learn valuable information about future puzzles, faction secrets, or hidden collectibles. Enemy characters, while not being violent towards the player as they're a small child, will be constantly on the lookout for the cure. Enemy NPCs will be carrying scanners that act as vision cones for detecting the player and the cure. And with the boy being burdened by the responsibility of carrying the cure, they must find ways to avoid enemy characters at all times. Being captured by enemies will result in the player being sent back to the most recent checkpoint.
To avoid being captured, the player will be able to hide or blend in with their surrounding environments. Hiding within groups of people, dark shadows, and crates will disguise the cure, and only the player's silhouette will be visible to signify that they are hidden from the enemies. Being that the player is just a small boy, stealth is their only option for survival. This is not an action game, and the mechanics will reinforce that.
Apart from stealth and navigating the world, the player will come across the people of the world, all who have either given up hope, gone mad, radically protest, or lived their lives fancy and fine. Through each of these personalities, the player will learn their stories, learn the struggles and the triumphs of those around them, and decide on where the cure, the item at the center of everything, truly belongs. The player's decision at the end of the Colder War will be the deciding factor of how Russia moves forward. The player will be able to choose which faction receives the cure or no one at all. Having multiple endings will also allow the game to have replayability.
With replayability comes a new experience each time. The pacing of Colder War is dependent upon how the player interacts with this world. While the story and difficulty will follow a typical flow model for pacing, it is up to the player to create their own experience. With multiple options for hiding or avoiding enemies, the player will be able to set their own pace. Taking a level slow and hiding when given the opportunity will make for a slower and more anxiety-inducing playthrough. However, using the level's multiple platforms and obstacles to avoid enemies could result in a faster pace, exceedingly challenging experience. The player should never feel as their skill level overpowers the challenges in the game, thus resulting in boredom and loss of interest. At the same time, the game should never feel unfair, resulting in frustration and possible rage quits. Boredom and frustration will actively draw the player away from the game, thus taking them out of immersion.
Immersion is extremely important to the experience in Colder War, thus our approach for the user interface or UI for Colder War will be based on the premise that we want the players to feel as submerged in the gameplay as possible. To help players out in exploring the world and the options that are at their players' disposal, you'll be able to hit a key for a brief highlight of interactable objects. Anything that the player can interact with will display appropriate icons such as speech bubbles or button prompts. To create a deeper sense of realism, we've done away with the inventory bar, or menu. Instead, if the player picks something up, it is shown directly on their person. In a situation where a blizzard or snowstorm is approaching, it makes sense for the player to be bundled up and warm, so finding a scarf and putting it on is a natural effect of the player equipping something to boost their fortitude against the elements. Our player is alive, and we wouldn't intend to make our audience see that in its entirety. Our player needs to feel as though their character is alive in this cold and beautifully dark world that they have been thrust into.
Colder War will feature a highly stylized art style. We'll make use of a simple color palette by having majority of the game set in a low saturation to show that this world and its occupants can be bleak. However, we will then use a contrasting color palette to pull the player's attention to specific areas, characters, and items to keep them moving on. The game will feature areas that have very distinct art designs. The areas controlled by the Kalash will be heavily influenced by old Russia. Propaganda posters littered about, flyers and handouts being passed around by the radicals trying to promote people to join the Kalash's cause, and workers trying to last a few more days. These areas will have an overall dark, decrepit, and gloomy appearance. The opposite can be said for the areas controlled by the Pravda. These areas will have near sci-fi themes while still being grounded. The player will see machines have taken over the majority of the labor force. People here are more carefree and indulgent. Their buildings will have sleek and clean designs. Instead of propaganda, ads will be displayed trying to elicit others to seek perfectionism. Alongside these pristine environments, though, will be a heavily militarized police force to enforce their way of life.
Sound will play an integral part in the Colder War. The player should be as immersed as possible, not only with our visual cues of the player shivering when cold, shaking when scared, etc., but they should also hear the player's pain when they get too cold. Teeth chattering, heavy breathing, whimpering, and so on. The environmental sounds will also be a large part of the immersion in the Colder War. Sound will be a constant reminder of the world the player is being immersed in. Music will be played throughout the game, however, it will be played in a manner that adds ambiance. The music will be faint most of the time, while occasionally picking up the pace during more intense moments of gameplay.
Through art, sound, and gameplay, Colder War will be a gripping experience that you will not want to put down. You will travel through a haunting yet beautiful version of Russia. The world and its inhabitants will come to life as you progress through the narrative and eventually decide the fate of the cure. Colder War offers the player a chance to make a meaningful decision in a world full of chaos. Who will you side with, and how will you deal with the events that unfold around you?
Thank you, friends, for your time and consideration. We look forward to working with you and bringing this vision to life.